Hi all. Today we are with Carole Cusack, professor of the University of Sydney, and she is going to tell us about indigenous and colonial culture and graveyards in Australia. Thank you, Carole, for your time, for your lovely availability. It's a difficult word. Please introduce yourself and introduce what you're going to talk about today.
Giorgio, thanks a lot. It's been a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you. I think death studies is a really interesting area, and it's not, when you first spoke to me, it's not one of my things. So I had to think very carefully about a way that I could come into it. And it came back to me from my own life, the fact that I've been visiting cemeteries, graveyards, since I was a very small child in the company of my father, well over 50 years ago. And I was thinking about the way that a country like Australia, which is struggling with its colonial past, with its terrible treatment of Indigenous people, with its violation of Indigenous cultures and customs, I was thinking about the way that we struggle to understand different customs, different traditions around burial, and how, for example, Indigenous graveyards or burial grounds, which I think is probably a better term, are really completely different in terms of their conception and their design and their use than any sort of graveyard that you would find settler colonialist Australians in. And I thought that's a kind of interesting thing. And the cemeteries that I like the most around the country are the old ones, the ones that date back to the beginning of European settlement, to the late 18th and the early 19th century. And that's also a particularly good time for looking at the displacement of Indigenous people and how that affected what they could do in terms of traditional burial rites.
Just out of curiosity, because like for a European like me, it's Australia is a very far away world. It's just to be clear, it's at the time was common to bury both indigenous people and colonial settler in the same graveyard, or there was separate graveyards for each.
This is one of the big legal challenges.
Okay.
Some of the best work has been done on how it's really simple and unambiguous if an Indigenous person is in an Indigenous burial ground and a person like me, a settler colonial Australian, is in an ordinary Christian or now secular burial ground, that does not bring up any problems. Okay. But a lot of the difficulties around Indigenous burial grounds also have to do with the highly complicated and very, very volatile, like people feel deeply about this stuff, the business of Indigenous human remains being kept in museums and galleries by anthropologists and archaeologists. And what should we do if a community, a tribe, successfully goes to the courts and argues for the return of their ancestors? And then one of the questions is, well, where do they get to bury those people who have been dead maybe 150 years and have been in cardboard boxes in some museum? And then it's a question of, where are the traditional grounds of that community? Do they even belong to the community anymore? You know, these things are really, they're very powerful. And of course, they create culture wars in the country, because right-wing media talks all the time about how this is just some kind of silly leftist indulgence to want to respect Indigenous ownership of their own ancestors' bones and body parts. Whereas, of course, people who aren't in the right-wing media space think that it's partly about decency and partly about atoning for the colonial violence that led to these people's body parts being in museums in the first place.
Yeah, just a matter of respect. I remember when I had a friend of mine that he's a funeral director in the UK, and he came here to Palermo. We went to see the catacombs of the Cappuccini, where there are the mummies. And he called me like, look, Giorgio, can you tell the monks, because the catacombs are run by the monks, can you tell the monks that this mummy had a veil, it fall down. So his intimate part, but of a 200 years old mummy, were like exposes. Like, please tell them to cover him because it's not respectful for him. He's dead, but he's still like deserve respect. It's not fair to stay naked in public because it's not right for him. It wasn't a matter like, oh, it's not right for the children. It's not right for the dead person. So yes, this matter like of sensibility and respect for the dead people that's indigenous, not indigenous, indigenous in a particular way because they suffer a lot for like the presence of colonial settler. Yes, it's a matter of empathy, even for dead people. They're like it's they still deserve respect. And just I wonder, is the right wing wrong in Australia? How is this the political situation in Australia? Just for the people who don't know, it's
Okay. Well, we have 3 levels of government, which makes
okay.
it very complicated. We've got a federal government that is at the top, and it can make laws under the constitution of the nation. But then we have state governments. So I live in the state of New South Wales, and state laws can, on some things, be quite different to other state laws. It makes it difficult being an academic, actually, because technically tertiary education belongs to the federal government, but universities are all set up under state parliamentary acts. That's different. And then we have local government. And local government is, in some senses, the closest to the people, and sometimes where some of the biggest conflicts occur. Say, for example, when somebody is trying to build a golf club on top of an Indigenous burial ground, it's usually the local community that has approved the golf club or wants it to happen or something, for people to use. But most of the legislation that really controls, say, for example, repatriation of Indigenous body parts or artifacts is federal. And also all of our land rights legislation, the legislation that enables Indigenous people to claim ownership and sovereignty over their traditional lands, that's all federal legislation as well. So we have a lot of complications there. But just politically, last year in May, we had a Labor government elected. Now, our right-wing media would like to make everyone believe that these people are incredibly dangerous lefties, but of course they're not. They're kind of moderate centrists, but we had a long period, a decade almost, of a fairly hard right government with a very strong pro-Christian agenda. And this is another interesting thing with regard to the way that white and Black Australians relate to each other, because like reasonably hardcore Protestants especially tend to regard Indigenous traditions as not religiously legitimate anyway. So, why should you give them any time? Because, they're not covered by the Bible and they're not Christian. And this is a very interesting thing, because actually a lot of our Indigenous people would identify as Christians anyway, but they still have this traditional way of operating in the country, which is completely different to white Australians. And it does create a lot of misunderstandings, I think. People often have very poor sort of understanding. And I think it's really great that you just asked me that question about what's the political situation, because since our new Labour government under Anthony Albanese, an Australian of Italian background, was elected last year, one of the things that they have been campaigning for, and it's one of their flagship policies, is to enshrine the Indigenous people of Australia in the Constitution. And this is a highly contentious issue.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Because, yeah, I think it's impossible to talk about colonialism without talking about politics. But also, it's impossible to talk about graveyards without talking about politics.
You are right.
Often people don't make this direct link, but graveyard are an extremely political element. It's in Italy, it's very clear because all graveyards in Italy, they are Catholics, and some graveyards, they have special space for not Catholic people. It's very it's very problematic. But our graveyards express an idea that the normal way to die is as a Catholic, that is not anymore like this, even among former Catholics. And yes, graveyards are extremely political element, extremely.
It has also a lot of implications. Like I am hoping to tell you a little bit about some of the problems we have with graveyards, but of course, one of the issues is that they are not particularly environmentally sound, and they're kind of not well managed in lots of ways. And, you know, I don't generally talk much about my personal life in interviews, but my partner died in 2021 after 2 very dreadful bouts of pneumonia. And he wanted an environmental funeral, but we have only a tiny number of places in Australia where it's legal to be buried in a cardboard coffin without any preservatives, so that you will basically decompose into the earth. And the closest place to us was on the north coast of New South Wales, in the Lismore area, which is an area known very well for people who are hippies and alternative religionists, which is why, you know, it happens there. But the fascinating thing was, my partner was from England, and he certainly didn't have a deep knowledge of Indigenous burial practices. But one of the things that Indigenous burial grounds have, they do not observe the Western habit of having coffins. People are simply interred in the ground. And the idea is that they will be there and it will be permanent. And this is because in Aboriginal religion and tradition, the ancestors live in the land. They're not out there like the Christian gods somewhere in space or anything like that. They live in the land. And so when people die, they're given back to the ancestors, and they're supposed to stay there in perpetuity. And of course, when you look at an ordinary graveyard, which of course in the colonial period, like Italy, they weren't all Catholic, but they were most definitely all Christian. And the only group of people who were given any kind of possibility of being buried in a different space were Jews. And we didn't have many Jewish people in Australia until quite late in the 19th century. But the interesting thing is the way the law has developed in colonial style graveyards, you're not there when you're buried, you're not there permanently. In fact, there's an idea that if there's some need to create a park or sell off land because the state government wants to, if there haven't been any burials there for 25 years, the land can then be said, well, it's not a cemetery anymore. And of course, this is something that causes a lot of grief for people who belong to religious traditions where tending the graves of your family and going out and putting, you know, flowers and photographs and eating and drinking like happens with the Day of the Dead in Mexico. We have some South American populations, and that kind of practice at graveyards happens. And we also have a lot of migrant Christian churches, particularly Eastern ones, Maronites, Melkites, the Assyrian Church of the East. And those communities are much more connected to the graves of their ancestors than the ordinary Anglo kind of Australian is.
Yes, in Sicily we have the Day of the Dead too, the 2nd of November, when we go to the graveyard. Sicilian culture is very afraid of that, so we don't go near graveyards during the year. Graveyards in Italy in general are like on the border of the city, surrounded by high walls. You just go there for the dead people. Usually don't go there. It's very different from the UK, when they're very integrated in the structure of the city. You go there just to walk, to read a book, something unthinkable in Italy. And you told your partner was British. And yes, it's there. They are very advanced about these things about natural burial and different ways uh, to organize a funeral, to get uh, the burial, all this kind of system. And I was thinking, like, do you know how many places in Italy there are when you can be buried without a coffin?
I don't know.
Zero, because
Zero.
it's extremely illegal. It's
Okay.
super duper illegal. We have very specific law. You must have a coffin, and these coffins are made in a very specific way. They must be closed in a very specific way, and it's a big issue. I was thinking about the Muslim. The Muslim, they will be, because the Muslim, they don't want coffins. The Jews neither. And another issue is that the Muslim, they like the indigenous people, they like to stay there for all their afterlife until the end of the day. But in Italy, the tradition is um, to clean the graves every 10 years. In Sicily, you can do it every 5 years. So it's not, because we have no space. So we clean the coffin very often, and we put new graves. And it's a problem for the Muslim, because like we can do it every 10 years. So they rent a piece of graveyard, but still they have to use the coffin. And
Yes.
this is a big issue about natural, environmental things and new tradition. Without a coffin, it's illegal and impossible. I know, no, there is no way.
Well, you've just raised another really interesting issue. Just if we're thinking about Australia, Catholicism actually is the biggest Christian denomination in Australia. We had a census of the population in 2021, and Catholicism was still, I think, 24.9% of the population, so about a quarter. If you put all of the Christian population together, all of the different denominations, it's a little bit over 50%, about 53, I think. But the majority of Australians, like the biggest number, is people who openly say they are non-religious. Like there's 39% of the population that say, well, we're not religious, we don't do any of this sort of stuff. And so we see some social trends that kind of parallel what you were saying there about the need for coffins and the legal arrangements for burials. We have now a situation where almost all non-Indigenous people without special religious rules for funerals will be cremated. It's just become the norm. It's funny because, when I was a kid in the 1960s, it was a shocking thing. And it wasn't just for the Catholics. My own family were Catholic, of Irish background. But the Protestants we knew also looked at cremation as a terrible thing. And it was because, it's funny, I know this now because I'm a scholar and I've researched it. It was because of medieval beliefs, from the Middle Ages. that the body had to be buried in an east-west orientation, with the head at the west and the feet at the east. So when Jesus came in the second coming, which was understood to be like a sunrise, the dead would rise up to greet him, and they would be facing towards him. And you couldn't do that if you'd been reduced to ashes. You know, this is something that simply would not work. And so it shows that in maybe the last 20 years, since about 2010, we've moved much more rapidly away from Christian style traditions. For most of the secular Australians, cremation is the only sort of thing that they would consider. And this is actually very good, because all of our non-Indigenous graveyards are hopelessly overfull, and we really don't have space for that many more people.
Yeah, like in Palermo, we are building a new graveyard because our full, especially the one for not Catholics, is full. So like, where do you put like, and they're going to take like years and decades. So I don't know what's going to happen with the minorities here in Sicily. And cremation is slowly rising. In Italy, in the north is like, there's in Italy, for the people who doesn't know, Italy, there's a clear division within north and south. When the north is richer, more industrialized, or more European, we want to say something like that, while the south is more traditional, more like less industrialized. So there's still in that, there's a huge difference between the two. And but cremation is rising, but we don't have, like, Sicily is the biggest region in Italy, and we have just 2 crematorium. Like, we have 3, but the third one is broken for like years. I don't know what's.
And no one's fixing it.
Well, they're thinking about, but the thing is that if you decide to get cremated, it's not easy as in other parts of Italy. So it's not yet. It's growing, slightly growing. Again, about cremation, we have a lot of limitation. Again, it's because Italian funeral law are very complex. So I think we can get like the water cremation. You can, like, the ashes must be always together. Like, and the police, like, you have to say, like, I have the ashes at home, and the police can come and check it.
To see that you have not opened the urn.
That you have it, really have it. Because if you say, like, I have it at home, and is a crime. Because it's like, for them, the ashes like a corpse. So like,
yeah,
it's like you say, okay, you have a corpse at home, you must have it. So there are a lot of regulation. Like, we have 3 siblings. We are 3 siblings. If my father die and we cremate him, we can't share the ashes. It's just all in one place, and there are specific places when you can throw the ashes, like in the nature, a very specific. Everything about that, it's very complex. It's because for us, it's very hard to move from the tradition. This is what I was used to do.
it's really interesting because it also has a lot of theological power. Like, that idea about not dividing the ashes is a little bit like the integrity of the body. Even though you've actually cremated this person, they could still reconstitute to meet the
Jesus.
Redeemer on the second coming. Yes. So there's this very powerful thing where, okay, all right, we've allowed you to have a cremation, but you've got to keep all the bits together so that it will still work when the end comes.
Yeah, it's and there is also a kind of course, religion and law, they influence each other. In Italy, there is the idea that the corpse is still a member of the society, so it's a community matter. For this, we don't have much freedom. Like in other countries, you can become a tree, you can become vinyl, you can be put inside a vibrator, you can do crazy things. In Italy, the corpse is still part of the society, so there are a lot of rules about it because it's not a private thing, it's not yours, it's still like a community matter.
Community matter.
Eh,
Yes, I was very shocked to discover hadn't really done much research, and when my partner died, I talked to quite a lot of people, about what experience they'd had. And do you know that people make diamonds out of the ashes of their dead? This is something that I find very, very extraordinary.
yeah, my favorite thing is you can become a music vinyl. You can even choose your song. This is my
Really,
favorite thing in the world. Yeah,
you can
this
become
is
a
amazing.
record.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. You can become a record. And that is a dream for me. Like, I would love this. Yes, you can become a diamond, a ball of glass. Now you can become coral. There are some things you can do. You can become compost in the Washington. You can become many things in the world. And for me, the music record is the best of the best.
It's the best. But Italy's got a long way to go before that's going to be possible.
Yes, no, long, long way to go. Yeah, yeah, you can do a lot of stuff. It's nice because it seems people they're trying to find new ways because many people don't feel the graveyard anymore as a place to meet and have a relationship with the loved one who passed away. So they're looking for new ways. And something I always tell to my student is a person will put the ashes inside a vibrator, and the first reaction is laugh. But then you start and think about it's a way to keep a relationship going.
Yeah. Look, I think this is really interesting because what you were saying about the fact in Italy that graveyards aren't places to visit,
Yeah.
I find that really interesting because when I was a small kid, my father, who was a plumber, nevertheless, he liked walking in interesting environments. So he liked big secondhand shops full of junk. He might find one thing out of like 10,000 pieces of junk that he was interested in, but he liked doing it. I still draw immense pleasure from walking in huge flea markets in Europe. I think it's one of the best things in the world. Another thing that he loved was graveyards. And when I was a child, Australia was coming into an interesting period. Like, we have different periods of history. Until 1901, we weren't actually a nation, a country. We were just a bunch of little colonies set up by the British. And so we had a certain kind of culture. And then in 1901, there was this idea that we become a nation, and our federal parliament was invented, and we got a national capital in Canberra about 30 years later. And when I was a kid, it was still quite embarrassing to have an ancestor who'd come out to Australia as a convicted criminal, which of course was what most of the, early
Australia.
they were all criminals from Britain and Ireland mostly. And it was a thing to be like kind of uncomfortable about. Of course, now it's a mark of immense pride. And what happened was there was a change. Like in 1970, it was 200 years since Captain James Cook allegedly discovered Australia. Now, we know perfectly well that the Indigenous people got here 60,000 years ago. So he didn't discover Australia, but he was not even the first white guy to walk in Australia. There were several others before him, but he was the one who got like the credit. And then in 1788, Arthur Phillip came out as an agent of King George in England to bring criminals as a dumping ground. And I mean, I love my American exchange students, just love this, because I always tell them, you know, the only reason we're even here is because the American War of Independence happened and the British used to dump their criminals in America. And when the Americans won, they said, right, well, you're not sending us any more of those people anymore. And the British were all having this crisis. Oh, heavens, where are we going to put them? And then it was like, right, we're going to put them in Australia. And that happened, you know, for about 50 years, just shiploads of people who were thieves and murderers in some cases. Most of the crimes were relatively small. But anyway, so what happens then is we have the 200th anniversary of Captain Cook, and I'm a little girl at that point, I'm 8. And we used to color in big pictures that were in the newspaper of these big ships with sails coming in, you know. So colonialist fantasy, you know, something that you couldn't do now. Everyone couldn't believe it. And then we go forward to 1988, which is the 200th anniversary of white settlement. And the funny thing is, just in that 18 years, people had started getting a little bit uncomfortable. And there was some revisionist history going. There was some amazing, brilliant Indigenous activism at that point. There was a Indigenous activist called Burnham, who actually was filmed getting out of a boat, carrying an Aboriginal flag and sticking it into the sand on Dover Beach in England, and then announcing that he had claimed the whole of Britain for the Aboriginal people of Australia. Of course, it was, you know, a symbolic action, we might say, but it was very, very clever and interesting symbolic action. And by the time we got to 1988, a lot of people started being interested in, well, I wonder if we had somebody who was like on one of the very early ships, or if we could trace our family back that way. And so I can remember walking in graveyards with my dad. I was 26 in 1988, and I'd been doing it with him for at least 20 years since I was about 6, trotting along behind him. And we started seeing on old gravestones these little plaques being put that this person came over on the first fleet and was therefore one of the absolutely first white people ever to step on Australia. And it seems really strange now, because I think everybody is much more aware of how problematic all of the European white people just spreading all over the world was. But in the story of my life, it went through periods where, like when I was a child, I hardly knew anything about any Indigenous people. They were almost never mentioned. You know, in the school textbook, you might get a couple of names of people who maybe helped one of the explorers, who was always white, of course, who was, it was exactly like Edmund Hillary climbing Mount, what is it called? Highest mountain in the world.
Everest.
Everest. Yes. Now, you know,
The Sherpas.
The Sherpas, you see, now they were already there and they kind of knew what was going on, right? So they're a much bigger part of the story. Well, when I was a kid, Indigenous Australians were like the Sherpas. By the time I was 25 to 30, we were much more aware that there was so much more to learn about Indigenous culture that we just didn't know. You know, we had no idea. And now it's an integral part of school curricula and, you know, university studies. And it means that the Australia I live in now is profoundly different to the very white kind of place that I lived in when I was a kid. But it still leaves us with questions like, when can Indigenous people get back bones of their ancestors? If they get them back, where can they put them? If they struggle in the courts, is there an argument that maybe they shouldn't actually have to abide by laws made by conquering white people anyway, which I think is a big issue. And I just thought it was very interesting when you said no one goes to the burial grounds in Italy apart from on the Day of the Dead, the Feast of All Souls on the 2nd of November. That's a really interesting difference, because Indigenous burial grounds are supposed to be permanent, and they are not visited except when it's time to bury another person. Whereas most of our cemeteries, apart from the really early ones, when the whites first arrived and people died of all sorts of illnesses because, you know, it just happened, and there were graveyards in the middle of Sydney, which was the first settlement. By the middle 19th century, we'd taken on board, even though we were out here at the absolute end of the world, we'd taken on board the idea of the garden cemetery, which came out of Paris. You know, Père Lachaise was one of the first, where it was all landscaped, and people would promenade on the weekend with their parasols, ladies on the arms of gentlemen, looking at particularly beautiful monuments and perhaps reading some poetry or whatever it was. And so the biggest cemetery we have in Sydney, Rookwood, which used to be called Haslam's Creek because a creek runs through it, a small river, but it is laid out in exactly that way. And it had this amazing mortuary railway station that people would be able to get on the train in the center of Sydney and go out and have a beautiful afternoon walking in the cemetery. And then they would catch the train back. And the mortuary stations were built like miniature Gothic churches. And it was really amazing. It was like a little piece of Europe that the settlers were trying to build here in Australia in this very different climate.
Yeah, it's a kind of exotic thing. In Italy, we have some like um, artistic graveyards, cemeteries, uh, and you can get some visits on them, but they're like a kind of special place because they have this artistic side. But usually, like I'm thinking about some Sicilian, they're like, oh yes, I usually go to a graveyard to read a book. They're going to think you're a strange person.
Just weird, yes.
And
well,
when I
nowadays, of course,
oh,
somewhere like Rookwood, our garden cemetery outside of Sydney, nowadays it's kind of governed as a kind of heritage site rather than as a living cemetery. And that's another really interesting shift. Why do we want to keep it looking beautiful? Because it's like a record of history dating from the mid-19th century up to the present. And there are historic graves of important people. And you might want to go and see them if you are especially an international traveler who is interested in various important people who might have lived in Australia, who were Poles or French or English or Greek or German or Italian for that matter, who migrated, you know, during the early years of the colony. So heritization is another one of our discourses, and that interlocks with the Indigenous case as well, because the keeping of bones and other remains and also cultural items by museums is a heritagization practice as well.
And this is a big issue all over the world. Like now, all over the you have like he's my ancestor, and sometimes you actually know who that person is, and we would like to have it back. But say that again. On one side, I think that on a global point of view, we are going the right way. But on this kind of indigenous question, I'm talking from outsider point of view. It seems that it's moving forward. Like every day, I see more and more news about repatriation. I see more organization, things organized by indigenous people, more presence of indigenous people in the UN, um, table. It's I think because also now the indigenous people, because I saw, and I hope you don't say something terrible. When I was in Indonesia, I lived with the indigenous community. I used to work with the Wana people of Morowali, and there are missionaries there. And I saw the issue of the relationship with the missionaries and the Wana people because the missionaries were carrying with them this kind of mythological being. They had helicopters. They come from the West. They're rich. They're powerful. I was a mythical being for them in some, like everything that I had was powerful. And especially like, and the mission brings this knowledge of the war. So it was a very funny chat with one of my informants, like, he told me like, oh, everybody believes in the same God. Like everybody, like, yes, everybody but the Jew. Like, how do you know about the Jew? Like you don't even know about Italy or like where Malaysia is. Like no, the mission told me. And beyond the anti-Semitic beyond that. But the thing is, there is a kind of unfair situation when the missionaries are more weapons on it. Like he has more cards to play, he's more knowledgeable. It's that so it's an unfair game. At least with the
Yes.
Wana people, I see like a strong answer. Now, indigenous community, they got more counter weapons. They can speak the same bureaucratic language. So now the game it's fairer. Like now you can't cheat us. We know you. We learn about you from you. We can speak the same bureaucratic language. So it seems that again, we're talking about indigenous people versus powerful people who destroyed culture, science from centuries. Is what they do. But since now the ground is a little bit heaven now. I don't know. It's
Well, that is certainly an interesting perspective, and I would hope that it is true. Of course, in the middle of the 19th century here, in the central parts of Australia, Western Australia, the Northern Territory, a lot of those areas and parts of Queensland too, were white people wanted to begin large cattle farms, cattle stations there, and they moved all of the indigenous peoples, the different tribal groupings. There were probably around about 300 different language groupings when Europeans came to Australia. And these people were just moved off their lands, and they were often moved into mission stations where they were virtually prisoners, really. They couldn't leave, they couldn't go anywhere, and they were force-fed Christianity and also a Western diet, which has resulted in a number of endemic and very serious illnesses amongst our Indigenous people, specifically kidney disease and also diabetes, which, you know, a lot of people would say is completely down to eating Western food. And what happened was a lot of groups lost their language relatively quickly. I mean, we're doing what we can at the moment to try to keep a number of Indigenous languages alive. There are Indigenous advocates and teachers around, but of the 300 odd languages that existed in the 19th century, you know, 3/4 of them probably are gone.
yeah, certainly true. Again, I see with the Wana people, like if they want to read anything in the language, is the Bible, the Bible, and then there is um, the Indonesian situation is very peculiar because in Indonesia, all indigenous community that follow indigenous religion are illegal. Their religion is not recognized. So many indigenous community did the trick to pretend to be Christian, to be Muslim, and keep doing that stuff. The Wana people, they say no, we are not going to convert. they declare themselves people without a religion. That is another issue in in Indonesia. It's extremely illegal. But the problem is that if they want to study, they have to go to Muslim school or to Christian missionary school. If they want to move out from the jungle, they have to convert, to adapt to this thing. They think like, or you stay still in the jungle, not moving. That is part of the mythological being, because they believe that if you stay still and don't change status, you're going to get a reward at the end of the day. But the thing is this, the choice is between standing still, that is almost impossible because now you have television, they trade, they work in oil palm plantation, they sell rattan. With the climate crisis, they get less rice, so they have to increase the trade with outside. So the choice is between stay still and it's impossible, or convert and lose your identity. There's no
Indonesia has a system, doesn't it, where there are 6 permitted religions, and on your identity card there must be an identification as one of those religions.
Exactly. Yes, there are only 6, and the choice of these 6 is very like political and Islamic centric, because must be monotheistic. So Hinduism now is monotheistic.
Yes, because you have to fit the model, and if the model is monotheism, then you have to look like you're monotheistic.
In fact, you must have a book, so all indigenous community are cut out, and you must not have ethnical boundaries. So the Jew are out.
Yes.
Because Indonesia and Israel, they have a long, terrible history. And Indonesians have a kind of obsession about Hitler. There is there is a political issue with Israel and a lot of kind of stuff. So there is this clear political choice between which religion can be accepted, what not. And indigenous religion not accepted. So you can have ID. Then if you marry between like 2 different religions, is illegal. So one of the 2 has to change.
Has to convert, yes.
You are going to convert towards the stronger one.
Yes, yes.
So each Wana who get married with somebody from not Wana is going to convert. So no, the situation of indigenous community, because Australia, with all the issue, is doing. But in other places like Indonesia, indigenous community are like in a terrible political situation. They have no power. There is no real fight. The government is openly against them. Something surprised me about Australia. I used to watch a YouTube channel called Two Set Violin. There are 2 violinists from Australia, I think Sydney, I don't know. And in one episode, they watch a video of somebody playing a didgeridoo, and not Aboriginal guy playing on, and it was like, no, like, well, you can't do that. It was very interesting to see, like, they learn in school, like in music school, like, if you're not Aboriginal, you shouldn't touch that instrument. And like, it seems to me very advanced in a way. This kind of sensibility, even for musical instruments.
There is a complication, though, isn't there?
Hmm.
Because, you know, we struggle with a whole lot. We as scholars struggle with a whole lot of things, and they're not easy, and there's no quick answer. So I often tell students, well, you know, there's this problem, and don't expect, you know, when you finish your degree, you still won't have solved it, because, you know, we haven't. So it's a problem. One of the problems I have that I see a lot, and it's interesting because it turns up in some of the legal cases around Aboriginal land rights, and also around repatriation of human remains. A lot of Aboriginal culture is, well, it's secret. If you still live in a tribal, traditional way, and you're initiated and you're part of your community, the women will have what's called secret women's business, and the men will have what's called secret men's business. And you're not supposed to ask about them. We had a very complicated and quite ugly law case over the building of a bridge to Hindmarsh Island, where a bunch of Aboriginal women said, look, you can't, there's a sacred space there and it's really important. And the interesting thing was, when they were asked, well, can you explain? They said, well, no, it's secret women's business and you're not supposed, you're men. You're not even men in our tribe. We're not going to tell you, but you have to understand it's real and it's important to us. And of course, back then, that was some time ago, and when the right wing was a bit more in the ascendant in Australia, people were being really abusive, like, what absolute bullshit is this? Like, they just don't want the bridge to be built. And so that's why they say there's secret women's business, but it's not. And of course, if you're brought up in like a university system, a Western university system, you have like an Enlightenment inheritance, and there's some kind of idea about knowledge being public. And so when you hear a group say, well, actually, no, this knowledge is privileged and it's for us, and it's not only that we don't want to share it with you, we can't. It's impossible. And then we have to step back and respect that, because they have a different view of the world, idea about how a human acts, about how a society works. And it would be utterly disrespectful not to accept that. But in Australia, some very honest anthropologists and archaeologists have said, this is something I struggle with every day. Like the one particular archaeologist who wanted to remain anonymous, obviously, was interviewed at one point, and he said, look, I don't believe personally in repatriation at all. I think that these things are for the whole of humanity. And while we have them in the space of science, in the space of the museum, they are for the whole of humanity. But I have to step back and I have to say that's just my opinion, and it's where I stand in the world. And these Indigenous people, these are the bones of their ancestors, and they're the ones who have the right to say what we do with them. So even though personally, no, I don't agree at all, obviously I say they must have them. They must be allowed to do whatever they like with them.
Yeah, first of all, the thing is, I think there is a clear lack of kind of respect, because all world governments, they have secret documents, and we respect them.
We do, we accept it.
They are no different from secret oral documents they have this community. The point is that we can't, I think there is a kind of racist and like issues with giving value to other system, like respect of ours. And I agree with the ethical issue of anthropology, and often our student struggle with this, not just a student. I feel like, and there's a matter of it's not important what I believe, it's not important what these people believe. It's their point of view, it's their matter. I cannot agree, but it's their battle. It's if it's important for them, that is all that matters. But it's I remember when I was a student master degree in Rome, a presentation of a scholar, a young scholar, like, yes, I live in I don't remember honestly. It was like kind of Buddhist monastery in Thailand or something similar. The problem is that I didn't get the permit to record anything because they didn't want to. And the problem is like, yes. So what did you do? Like, I hope you change research because once you can record anything, it's change research.
It's
And
impossible.
it's impossible. And something that, again, work with indigenous culture, with the one people, I had the opposite problem. When I had issues and them didn't. I work with funeral, so recording people crying, suffering, very private emotional moment, and I didn't feel good to do it the first
No,
time, so I didn't do it. But then I learned, like, we don't care. Like,
no.
the point of view, like, we don't care. Like, you can do it. Actually, they asked me to watch it then. Like, look, can I watch the funeral you recorded? Was my ethical problem. I wasn't there. Like we don't care. Like, you're not here recording, not recording. We don't care. We're going to do it. Actually, if you record, we're going to have a memory of it. So it works in both ways. Like,
It
uh,
does.
so it's so important as anthropologists to understand what is important from the other one and to try to don't impose ourselves. Is hard. It's extremely hard. It's because it's natural. We must be honest. I think it's natural to be ethnocentric. I think is a very natural thing. But we learn to stop 1 second and think like, uh, especially with very different. It's. Did you ever had any of this kind of issue working with this ethical issue about where do I stop?
It's funny that you should say that. I would have said no mostly, but I spent a lot of time in Bali with my late partner. We used to go sometimes twice a year. We were very boring. We always stayed in the same place, a very cheap little hotel in Sanur, which is a village
Nice.
that is run by Brahmins. It's considered extremely auspicious to have your funeral there. So basically, the village quite often was, it came to a standstill because there was a funeral going on there like every day. And I can remember the first time that we were walking down to the seashore and we crossed a funeral procession. And it was quite surprising. My partner was very shy and didn't like talking to people that he didn't know. And I'm not, I'm quite outgoing. But we were given garlands and offerings and told to join the procession. When we got to the temple by the sea, which is the specific funerary temple, there's one in the north, one in the south, and the one in the center that's on the coast, which is where, and we were told, obviously, that we could only go into the outer courtyard, and then we could lay down the garlands and the food that we had as offerings and kind of bow out. We wouldn't be able to be in the funeral from there on. And it happened so often over the years that we would just be walking somewhere and something religious would be happening. And instead of people looking and saying, oh, they're foreign, they shouldn't be involved, somebody would say, oh, join in.
Yeah.
But of course, because we never went into the temples for the ceremonies, it wasn't until we were in San Francisco in 2011 to see Wagner's Ring Cycle, actually. And we went to the amazing Asian museum that was across the square from the Opera House. And would you believe the exhibition was on Balinese funerals? And so we went there and we were able to watch film of all the things that we had never actually been able to see inside the temples, because obviously the anthropologist who'd taken these films was like, you, oh, no, we don't mind. But you come in, come and film this. It's fine.
It's fine. Exactly. It's Especially there's a huge cultural difference between how we approach that. Like in Southern Europe, in Italy, it's very serious matter. There's all this kind of bourgeois element of seriousness, of emotion. It's a very recent thing because traditional funeral in Sicily were very different. There is a beautiful book called uh, Morte e pianto rituale, Death and Ritual Weeping, by De Martino, was never translated, sadly. And it talks about funeral in Europe when they were very different with sexual jokes, sexual games, food, and of course, after the Second World War and the increase of bourgeois culture, it deeply changed. So for us, like all this kind of very serious element, and something I noticed, I have this friend who works with the Ghana community in Palermo, and they do videos. They have special people, like they pay professional to make videos, and they also want to make videos during the funeral in the graveyards, but that is illegal in Italy.
Uh, the law again.
Again, okay, it's illegal. There's the kind of point of view of they should be fine. They want to do it. So why is it illegal? If I am with my family, why can't I take a picture with my family in the graveyard?
Because
Because
the government says you can't.
you can't. Like it's incredible. And I remember I was talking with somebody that he tried to take a picture, and it was considered strange, like morbid. She was like was her family, was her like, but was considered morbid to take a picture during the funeral. And and then we bring this kind of mentality when we go to work and live with other people that
Who don't feel that way.
they don't feel that way. They don't see all the like this terrible and seriousness of death. Like with one of people, it's just 2 days of getting drunk and eat.
It
Uh,
makes sense.
it makes sense. Now in February, I hope February, they're going to, my book is going to be ready. And the cover is people laughing, watching the video of a funeral.
Yes, I like it. It's a good idea. There should
and,
be
this,
more of it.
and these people are like the husband, the mother-in-law, the mother, the father, destroyed by the pain.
Yes.
But then, when they're laughing because it was the good memories of the funeral, of staying together, it's for them it's opportunity to stay together and spend time together, spend good time together. And
Happy
no,
memories.
happy memories. For us, not like for us, at least for the Italian culture, there are not happy memories in the funeral. Not now, because it changed, but not now.
I think
Yeah.
that this is a very important project that you have going, because I think that most Western people are caught up in a terrifyingly bad denial of death. And this is not the topic of our conversation. And I'm sure you're going to talk to somebody else probably about the terrible psychological and social outcomes that come from us constantly. Well, I don't think I do, but people worshipping being young and not wanting to get old and being terrified of dying. I mean, I think this is a conversation we need to have.
Yes. And before we were talking about cremation, cremation is rising because it's so as a kind of effortless thing. Like I want to be cremated so I don't have to think about it. Because funeral are boring, are annoying, are problems. So I want to be cremated. So there is not a choice about like space, ecology, rituality. It's a choice about like even when I die, I don't want to think about it. That
Well,
it's
they've probably been to so many funerals and they know they don't want a funeral like that. And people can think, well, if I am cremated, it will be easier.
it would be easier. But the thing is, they don't know. and I'm afraid they can't, to know like they can have different funerals.
Yes.
This is something that I think in Italy is a huge issue. It's very hard to create new tradition. That is, I think, is the key to solve the issue. The old tradition, because we were talking before about that, we're a Catholic country, but more about like it's more about tradition and inertia than truly being a Catholic country. So even funeral now is more about tradition and inertia, but many people are losing that contact because they're losing the link with religion, with their religion. So going to the church, in a priest selling, I'm not going to say something bad, but things that you don't believe, they don't touch you because you don't share the same value of the priest anymore. So yes, it's a waste of time because that fear is not making anything for you. But there is not, what is lacking is the idea that you can do something else that is in Italy is almost impossible. We should work on that because fear are crucial, but it's a strange moment. Uh, it's a strange moment because it's people need funerals, but we are not giving them, and they don't know they need funeral.
So what's on offer as far as the funeral supermarket in Italy goes doesn't really meet anybody's needs.
The funeral, the offer usually are two: cremation or the graveyard, and
Catholic
and
ceremony.
ceremony. That is the offer. Of course, you have minorities in some place of Italy can have something different. It changed because we have national rules, regional, and like city. It's very complex. Something I had an interview with the city council, not the city council, with the people managing the graveyards in Palermo. And they told me, like, look, I don't know what to tell you, but we didn't have any complaint or any chat or anything, any issue with the minorities. I thought, like, look, this is incredible information because it means the minorities, they're not even trying. They know they're not going to find any support, any, so they're not even asking. It's a depressing information that is extremely important. Minority in my own town, they are not even try because they know there is no way they can have what they want.
What we say in kind of Western slacker culture, that's a lose-lose situation.
Yes, because it was serious because it was very kind. The lovely person was very kind, was very helpful. Like, look, I don't know how to help you because nobody contact us, nobody asked for anything. Like, look, this means a lot. Uh, but then I see in the US people organize funeral pyres, organize parties, or in the UK you can have like a natural burial, you can eat at home. There's a lot of already in your culture you can choose. There's something to choose. I think in Italy there is not this idea of choosing, especially because we are not trained to. We're not trained to like. It's something that nobody teach us what to do when somebody dies now because we are the young generation. We have been protected from that. So honestly, I don't know what my generation is going to do when they're going to organize a funeral. But usually you just call the funeral service, then they're going to do everything. It's all very quick. But it's not working. And yes, there is not a mentality to organize something different. It's not a mentality. It's not easy.
Well,
It's
this is one of the outcomes, hopefully, of your researchers to lead towards a different way of doing death in
yeah, we
Italy.
hope. Not just in Italy, because my hope is for like something was interesting. It's not New Zealand, Netherlands. Netherlands is an interesting country because they are very advanced in the death studies, and they have this strong individualistic freedom as a pillar of their culture. So, like, you can do whatever you want. That is also helping a lot with religious freedom. Like, in the Netherlands, I think neo-religious movement are the best rights in all Europe, I think. They're easily recognized, they're easily respect. Like, your religion, fine, I respect you. Like, easy. Uh, I hope that for also for the future, because my point is that why something is possible in a country and not in another. We should learn from the people who do better. Do you think there is, I don't know if you know about, if there is any strong difference or a dialogue or a connection between the US and Canada and Australia? Because I think they are facing similar issue or not? With
In terms of recognition of Indigenous people, maybe yes. Australia is heavily influenced by America. It wasn't so much when I was a kid. We were much more looking still towards Britain as the kind of ancestral country of Australia. But the change in probably the 70s, when I was a teenager, we moved more towards American popular culture, American interests, American like expressions in speech and all sorts of things like that. And I think, obviously, America has been the place to which Australia looks politically for protection. Maybe that is not such a great idea now, but, you know, it was certainly true. I mean, after all, we fought with the Americans in the Pacific War against the Japanese. You know, that was a kind of big thing in World War II. So I think Canada much less so, even though, in fact, Canada is closer to us than America in that they still acknowledge the monarch in Britain, King Charles.
Commonwealth. You're
Yeah.
both part of the Commonwealth, not?
I'm not sure, but I know that the monarch is still honored in Canada, so I'm assuming maybe yes. In fact, it's funny that you should say that, because someone in my office today, one of my PhD students and I were talking about this Commonwealth. Like, what is it really anymore? Because I think, again, it's a sort of interesting idea. We've come to see it as being like a sort of fake word for the British Empire, which is gone, you know. And so it seems like a weird sort of thing that doesn't have any purpose. And I think this is you were talking about your generation being younger and how will it be when you have to organize funerals. I think that attitudes towards the monarchy and attitudes towards things like the Commonwealth, there's a big gap between, say, people who are 70 and people who are 40. And by the time the people who are 40 are all in charge, I think it will all be dismantled. It will all be finished. But we still have, amongst older Australians, a very strong loyalty to Britain, to the Commonwealth, to the monarch, you know, that kind of symbolic stuff.
That I don't get, honestly.
I don't know.
I'm very fond of the French approach to monarchy, honestly. I really like how the French approach it. So don't, even when I was in the UK, I honestly didn't get it.
Well, it was funny because I didn't watch the coronation, and I was talking to a number of friends, international academics, and some of them were quite shocked and said to me, "But aren't you interested in rituals? You really probably should have watched it just because it might have been interesting or instructive to see what they were doing." And I thought, I don't know. I haven't got that much time to waste watching a coronation. Thank you. What I'm going to do is, when people publish the first 5 articles on the amazing things that happened in the coronation, I'll read them and then I'll know what happened. I didn't have to actually watch it for myself.
Especially because, yeah, fine, I just see in rituals, but I'm not going to watch a Super Bowl every year.
No, once is enough.
I can say rituals, not all rituals, and also you have free time. Like it's I can watch a funeral. I can watch funeral, yes, but yeah, I can watch everything. Otherwise, I'm not going to survive. And like it's and I don't study coronation. I study funerals and shamanic rituals. So when
There
you're
you go.
going to
You
do,
could say it's not really my thing, you know.
it's really my thing. It's and then again, I think there is important element on anthropologists. We should say something that makes us happy, and monarchy doesn't make me happy. So it's
No, I'm not a monarchist either.
so the funeral that can makes me happy, but not coronation.
Not the coronation.
But it's depends. Yeah. May I ask you a last things that it's just outside, but just a curiosity because we're talking a lot about young anthropologists, and you are a teacher, and I love teaching. Honestly, I love teaching more than do research. It was
Ah,
strange.
interesting.
I love doing research, but teaching is I don't know. It fills my heart. Honestly, it's and just out of personal curiosity, and maybe also the listener can be interested in that. As a teacher of anthropology in some way or another, what is the biggest issue you face?
Well, I'm not an anthropologist. I have a lot of friends who are. And it's always a bit difficult because I did all of my studies in a religious studies department. And then people say, well, what does that mean? And what it really means, as you know, is you have a whole lot of different methods that you can kind of choose. And so I have two hats. They're almost the same, just a little bit different. And so sometimes I say to people, I'm a sociologically influenced historian. And sometimes I say, I'm a historically influenced sociologist. It depends where I see myself. I find anthropology is an interesting issue. You would know that there are a lot of people who think basically that anthropology and sociology are basically the same thing. It's just that in anthropology, mostly it's indigenous populations or maybe exotic populations that are the research group, whereas in sociology, it could just be the ladies in your supermarket that you're researching. And so one is kind of, you research people who are like you, and one is like you research people who are different to you. But in lots of ways, they're similar. I think some of the best theorizing and some of the best books that I've ever read have been written by anthropologists. And I would always refer to a lot of anthropological scholarship, but I'm not one, really.
Yeah, like I use the word anthropologist because it's it's very complex because like I have a master's degree in ethnomusicology. My PhD, the thing written on it, it's theology. There's something that I don't know anything about it, honestly. Anything. It's just that Dun University does write all of his theology, even his department is theology and religion. But so I'm a theologist. So
you're a theologian. See, my master's degree says education. So
then I did a research in the Indonesian jungle in a very old-fashioned way, anthropologist way. So it's I I strongly struggle with definition because it's sometimes in Italy they're like walls. In Italy it's crazy. In Italy, like I can't say I am an anthropologist in Italy because anthropologists are going to kill me. I was talking with my professor because in Italy we have history of religion.
yes,
In religious studies, history. I was talking with my professor of history of religion, like, look, I would like to write a small book for students on fieldwork, how to do fieldwork. Very small introductory book for first year student. he told me like, you can do it, but all anthropologists of Italy, they're going to hate you because you are not anthropologists. Like, what? What?
Sorry.
So it is crazy, and and then you get like certification. So I apply for certification in study religion, and then I can only teach study religion. If I want to teach anthropologists, I have to get, and then I have to publish on journals that are on that field. Like everything that I wrote in ethnomusicology is not counting if I want to become an anthropologist.
It's terrible and it's so wrong.
It's so
But
wrong.
I did have some idea about this because actually I have a couple of young Italian PhD students who have emailed me and got in touch and asked for help and for references and things like that. And I have helped them out over the years. And I've understood that it is extremely difficult for them to break into doctoral programs with sympathetic supervisors, that they're supposed to change their ideas and do what the professors want rather than doing what they would like to do. And it sounds to me like it's a very difficult area. And yet I know that there are some departments that aren't like that, because as I think we commented in our email exchange, I have friends with, I am friends with Stefania Parmasano at
Oh,
University
she's
of,
lovely. Yeah.
and I know the people that she works with, Nicola Panafino, and they're nice, and they're open-minded and interesting. And I was thinking, one of the things when you were talking about getting new religious groups in and discussing, what is needed in Italy, you need to talk to the Damanhur people about what they do for funerals and what they would like, because they're just, they're like one of the most famous alternative communities in the world. And they're just north of Turin. And Stefania is the expert on them. So there's someone there, some people to catch up with.
Yes, because I must say that religious studies, Israel religion in Italy, is a nice environment. I would say ethnomusicology is also a nice environment. Anthropology is a terrible environment because they're like uh, fools, and so you study with that professor, so you are my enemy. It's all about power. It's terrible. The academic structure in Italy is very stupid because we talk a lot about interdisciplinarity, but the entire system forces you to don't do it. Like
Yes.
I have an issue because I wrote in ethnomusicology, music therapy, in religious studies, like anthropology, in that studies. But then they force like, no, you have to choose one. And like my wife, she's a PhD student in education. In Italy, there are like kind of four different kind of education. So if you're the first one, you can only publish on journals or the first one. If you publish, like if you do something slightly interdisciplinary, you publish like in education too, not like in anthropology or in like engineer. No,
Just the
education
wrong kind of education journal.
it doesn't count anymore. Like it's just crazy. It's so but and beyond that, it's in Italy there is still a strong sense of the professor and the supervisor is God, and he has a lot. I never had this kind of problem. I was very lucky because I come from a musicology, it's a lovely environment. In Rome, study religion is a lovely environment. In Turin too, so I was very lucky. But I know terrible stories of people that they cannot publish because the supervisor doesn't give them the permit, or they can't do anything. They can't even send an email without the permit of the supervisor.
That
And
is terrible.
that is terrible. It's
It's
so
terrible.
my usual advice for students like do the PhD outside.
If you
Go on.
can. If you can get funding somewhere else, go somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Go somewhere else. It's absolutely. It's no the entire academia. It's obviously as a naive and young person, I tried to become a professor And my plan is to I'm trying to become a professor with some friends, more or less, so we can have a group and try to change some stuff to try
Revolutionaries.
to create a better and more serene environment. Because like this is not like outside some small nice areas is a nightmare. It's a nightmare, and even doing a PhD is very hard because okay, I'm going to tell you anyway. In some place, it's not going to win the best one. There is a list of people. So, like, if you Carole Cusack from Australia apply for a PhD in Italy, you have almost zero chance to get it because there are
I
the
know.
students there, they are waiting for it, and then they're waiting for the researcher place, and then they're like, there is a line.
But you know, that is not unique to Italy.
Absolutely.
I have an acquaintance who is now a professor of French in the UK. I won't say which university, but when she first got a scholarship to study in Paris to do her PhD, she said people would ask you not what you were studying, but whether you attended the École Normale Supérieure. And she said no. And she was never able to say, because I didn't even grow up in this country, so I couldn't have possibly gone there. But the point was, she was told so often, if you're not a Normalian, you're not worth knowing.
No, it's French is a very similar situation. Portugal is very similar.
It's very inward looking, you know. The
Yes.
country has its own standards, its own people, its own special areas, and you have to fit. And if you don't fit, well, you know, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't matter, you know.
My biggest issue at the moment is that my PhD from Dalarna University, from the fourth best department in the world, is not recognized in Italy
Why not?
because I have to pay 600 euros and get a lot of documents to demonstrate that is a real PhD recognized in Italy.
This is terrible.
So I have to send document to the embassy, to the UK government, then get it, send it to the Ministry of Education in Italy, to say that a PhD from the UK. And the funny thing is that you get a PhD in bags. You get a PhD in bags. If that PhD doesn't exist in Italy, you can not get recognized.
That's just insane.
So, and of course, all people from outside Italy, they're not going to apply for a job in Italy because the job comes out 1 month before the deadline, and you need like 6 months to get the recognition of your PhD. So Italian system is totally closed to foreigners because we don't want other people coming and taking out power. It's like I just studied in England and then went for a PhD for a postdoc in Portugal. And when I came back to Italy, I was treated as a foreigner. People told me you should start from zero again. So I actually applied for a PhD and I didn't get it.
No, this is terrible.
I didn't. And with the same project, this one that trying to get the money from the European Union. I got a job in the University of Rome La Sapienza. My PhD I could because there was just one place, one spot available, and of course, if my project will pass the first selection with my CV, I will win against a master degree student for sure. So they just stopped me at the beginning. So my project was bad for them.
Yes, it's not going to
Uh,
work. Sorry.
More because there was a plan. Yeah, in Italy we often talk about the Italian word is fuga al cervelli, the brain cave, because we have very good scholars, then they go away because there is no opportunity. But the problem is not that people go away. The thing that nobody comes to Italy. no foreigners will come to Italy because the money are not good.
The
situation.
system is skewed against them, so they can't
Yes.
anyway.
So this is a problem. Nobody wants to come to Italy. This is like I'm from Italy and I have an issue. I have an issue because I left for 10 years almost. And it's
And
like
did lots of other interesting things in other parts of the world.
but luckily you find people like Stefania, like my professor Rob, they appreciate international experience. There are people like I don't want to say like they are enlightened. They're just normal people. They are normal. They're people that they have issue. They appreciate an international background, international, but they are minorities, sadly. The majority wants to keep their power, sadly. That's
Yeah.
Anyway, with the sad part, also because I took a lot of your time, I wanted to thank you for the chat today. It was lovely. I learned a lot. Honestly, it was very fun. And thank you.
Well, I'm going to go and eat some crackers and cheese because it's dinner time and I'm hungry. And maybe I'll have some wine.
It's a very British thing to do.
Yes. I'm not much of a cook. I usually eat my main meal at lunchtime at the university, and at night I just snack on things. And I might go and talk to one of my cats. There are 5.
Oh, okay. So you have plenty of choice.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
a very Italian. I'm going
time.
to cook some pasta.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Talk
you.
to you later.
See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.